The queer community has had a convoluted and colorful history, with the modern queer community taking ideas and identities everywhere from Greek lifestyles to modern icons. Little known, however, and quite importantly, modern queer culture has its origins in large part in a very dark and seemingly well known place, Nazi Germany. From the world's very first ever gay rights movement, the destruction of the first contemporary sex studies, and lasting symbols of modern day gay and queer identity found directly from the persecution of gay Germans in the 1930s and 40s, Holocaust era Germany has had a profound effect on the identities of today's gay and queer communities. While the Holocaust is known as the mass roundup and extermination of especially the Jewish and Romani peoples, its classification of homosexuals as criminals and asocials, and thus their own internment, is much less widely known of. As historians, as queer folk, and especially as humans, we have a responsibility to know its full history. As previously stated, the world's first gay rights movement actually began in Germany in the 1880s, 50 years before the initial takeover of the Nazi regime. This movement reached its peak popularity in the 1920s, with underground gay bars being fairly prominent, even with Article 175 being in effect. Article 175 was the German legal code that labeled homosexuality a quote-unquote unnatural vice, and thus outlawed any and every form of male homosexuality. This did not, however, silence Magnus Hirschfeld. Hirschfeld was a German sex researcher and political activist in the early 20th century. He was known for establishing the Scientific Humanitarian Committee as well as the first Institute for Sexual Reform, an academic institute dedicated to sexology and other sexual research fields. He also notably wrote many books and dissertations promoting homosexuality, socialism, and left-wing policies. For these reasons, the arson of his Institute for Sexual Research was one of the very first acts of terror committed by the Nazi Party in the early 1930s. The burning destroyed an innumerable amount of information and research done on sex and sexuality. It was committed in 1933 by Ernst Röhm, one of the Nazi Party's earliest military leaders. Röhm himself was actually gay, although he believed in a Greek form of homosexuality, which involved older men sexually and militarily mentoring younger men and boys. Today, folks, we would call that pedophilia. Because of Nazi persecution, Hirschfeld, like many of his contemporaries, fled Germany and settled in France. He died shortly after in 1935 of cardiac arrest. This would mark the beginning of the most tragic eras in queer history. Following his death was the rise of the Nazi Party to ultimate power over Germany and much of Eastern Europe, and along with this came the concentration camps. While Jewish people were forced to wear the Star of David, gay men and women had their own identification patches. Gay women were classified as asocials, a less severe offense than male homosexuality, but nonetheless still an internable offense, and they were made to wear black inverted triangles. Gay men, seen as the scum of society and persecuted much more harshly, wore pink inverted triangles. Little is known about exactly what happened to them in the camps, but this is often accredited to the fact that very few gays actually made it out alive. Those who did were typically rearrested, as Article 175 wouldn't actually be repealed until the 1990s. By the 1960s, however, the international gay and queer community knew enough about the horrendous experience of their early German counterparts to have taken the symbols of the inverted black and pink triangles as a new symbol of gay pride and identity. The pink triangle, which they reclaimed by pointing upwards and making it hot pink, was especially prominent. In fact, in the 1970s, a gay California newsletter was nearly put out of business when it urged its readers to stop using the symbols unless they themselves were Holocaust survivors. The vast majority of these readers deeply disagreed with this, with many of them seeing themselves as the continuation of gay and queer disenfranchisement and persecution. The gay queer community of these times were facing increasing police brutality, widespread lack of justice for those who were attacked and killed for being outspoken about their sexualities and identities, and severe mishandlement and inaction from the Reagan administration during the AIDS crisis, in which millions within these communities died. The usage of the pink triangle as a symbol of gay and queer identity is what Gonzaga Student Research Award winner Marnie Warholm labels a form of collective identity. What this means is that By the American gay and queer communities effectively appropriating these triangular symbols as a part of their own identity, they were forming a collective, worldwide gay and queer community that together shares in their individual struggles as a whole, and together they form a collective memory. This can be explained as the human tendency to relate and remember or honor the experiences of others like us. The Holocaust, with its extreme atrocities and the persecution of so many people and people groups, is the perfect kind of event to form collective identities and memories from, especially when, as with the worldwide gay and queer community, the rest of the group outside of those who directly experienced the Holocaust also tend to face danger and persecutions themselves, albeit in different forms, but for the same reasons of being gay and queer. While little may ever be known about the exact experiences or numbers of the gay men and women who suffered and died in Nazi Germany, the memory of their experiences lives on in a haunting and powerful way within today's contemporary queer communities. Hot pink triangles are still to this day one of the biggest symbols of gay pride, and their use spans across the globe. The oldest of today's queers and gays can still remember the initial reclamation of the pink triangle in 1964, and the youngest of us have even more access to our history and the origins of the symbols that we use than ever before. But the full impact of the Holocaust in our lives has been neglected for too long. And I hope that the informational video that I've shared with you today will inspire more of my homosexual and heterosexual peers to want to know more about our collective history.